difficulty and for the lack of obnoxious music while we were on hold. Welcome. Actually, we were having some technical stuff, but I think they're getting it fixed. If you can't hear me all right, then just do what you normally do, which is play a game on your iPhone. So let's start with a prayer. God, we thank you for who you are for us, with us, and within us. We trust and we hope that we may speak because you are listening. And so help us to listen for you. If there's anything helpful this morning, please seal it to our hearts. And in any case, thank you for loving us, and we wish you a terrific Sunday. Amen. Okay. Yeah. Nobody ever thinks to wish God a good day, right? All right.
Right.
Okay, first, what does that say? What does this say? This says leave computer audio. All right, how's that? All right. So, and I have no idea if this little microphone is working that
We can hear
you can hear it. Okay. So first, a disclaimer. There are some memes in this in the presentation. Unfortunately, most of them that are both humorous and illustrative leave men looking rather bad. But if we can transcend the sexist cliches that are in these memes, they might help us make a point. I also want to say that women are also free to approach me afterwards and point out that they were, after all, accurate. So, number of things that I'm saying this morning come from a book that I would recommend to you titled The Lost Art of Listening by Michael Nichols. It's a really good book. I use it when I teach seminary students. And so even though I've used it for years, every time I look at it again, it convicts me of sin about every other page. So if you want to think about listening, get that book. Also, I invite you to jump in with questions, concerns, amplifications, rebuttals, or any of that sort of thing. Okay, have to change this.
Would you just suggest that we want to be convicted of sin in every 2 days?
Well, most of you could probably be convicted of sin like every 15 minutes, but we won't get into that.
That's my point.
I always like a few quotes just to help us think. Paul Tillich, very famous theologian from the last I guess that's permanent, that little arrow. From the last century, said the first duty of love is to listen. And then Alfred Brendel, who was a composer and an artist, said the word listen contains the same letters as the word silent.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I thought that was clever. And then I supervise psychoanalytic candidates, and one of the things that I frequently say to them is never pass up the opportunity to say nothing, because we tend to get anxious and jump in. Now, that of course doesn't mean that we can't speak, because if someone is talking to us and we just sit there saying, okay, I know I'm not supposed to talk, eventually they begin to wonder if you're even interested at all. So it doesn't mean we can't speak. What it does mean is that we need to listen well enough to know A, whether it is time to speak, and B, what to say when we do speak. So it doesn't mean utter silence, it just means not talking as much as we usually do. Now, there's a big difference between hearing and listening. When I know my wife Lynn is talking, I'm hearing her. When I know what sort of day she has had, then I'm listening to her. Now, hearing also can be used in the context of, I'm hearing you, meaning I'm listening to you. But we hear stuff all the time, but we don't always listen. Now, just a little exercise. I want you to think of just this moment, just kind of be quiet and think of either someone you were recently with or someone that you see periodically, when you don't feel like, and we all have some friends that are kind of like that, and you feel like they're not listening to you. So think for a moment about what they're doing, either verbally or non-verbally, that makes you feel that way. Now, if you want to share them, what are some of the things that make you feel not listen? Excuse me. What? It's a potential spam call, but it could be somebody important. So here, all right. So what do people do that makes you feel not? Yes.
Okay, so I'll be talking about something, and then if they will then make a remark that has to do with them and not, it's like, oh, okay, they were waiting to talk about themselves.
Right. So you say something and then they pull it back to their own experience.
Yeah, or something.
Yeah, or their own.
It's not related.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with you anymore.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. That's pretty
That's a
common.
buzzkill.
It's,
They're not looking at you.
but they're not looking at you.
They're watching TV.
They're watching TV. Pardon? Or looking at their phone. Right. Well, in my case, it was important. All right. Okay. Wow.
It's like that.
Well, there we have it. There we have it. Pardon? They cut you off. Okay. All right. Now think of friends that you have that you do feel listened to when you're with them. And just think about being with them, what it's like, and what they do, either verbally or non-verbally, that makes you feel listened to. Okay. They look, they nod, they repeat what you said. Okay. Yeah.
They don't respond immediately. They're taking in what you just said. It's not that they're just waiting for a chance to talk. They're actually taking in what you said.
So they're actually receiving what you're saying and thinking about it before. Okay, that's super. Yeah.
Yeah, you can really, I'm very aware of people where I can feel that they're sort of leaning in and wanting to take in. And it's not necessarily a verbal thing, but you can feel it when somebody's interested and also emotionally vulnerable with you.
So it's not passive,
No.
even if they're being silent, that listening is not passive. Would somebody want to say something over there? Yes.
Sorry for being late, but.
We're all horrified. And I think it'll be mentioned from the pulpit later.
I was here to say, unhurried, like when someone's listening and you don't get the sense that they're maybe wanting to be somewhere else.
Unhurried, that's a good
Right.
word.
And that's really an excellent point too, in that depending on what the conversation is going to be about, the context is really important. You know, if I have to be somewhere in 15 minutes, it's not a good time to be talking about with a friend of ours, for example, who just had a diagnosis of breast cancer. So you can always say, gosh, I'm in a hurry. Let's talk about this later and make the time. But that's a really good point, the sense of somebody's kind of needs or wants to be somewhere else.
Or they ask where the bathroom is.
Yeah, so when you feel like they're settled in with you, is what you're saying. That's great. Okay. Some of the things that we're going to be going over today are precisely some of the things that you were just talking about, because these are very common experiences for us. But I'm hoping if we can get them in little crystallized forms, they will stick with us a little bit. Scripture even demonstrates the importance of listening. And normally we think about, how we're supposed to listen to God, which is not a bad idea, but also listening to each other. Just a few of them. Let's see. There it is. The fool takes no pleasure in understanding, but only in expressing his opinion. Proverbs says, if one gives an answer before he hears, it is his folly and shame. And oops, that should be a little bit lower. This should be down here, but in talking to us about how we're supposed to live together in Romans, the Apostle Paul says, rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those who mourn. And in other words, have empathy. Live yourself into that person's circumstances. Try to imagine and feel what they're feeling. And then in James, it says, my dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. And actually, it's harder to get angry if you are quick to listen and you're slow to speak. It really calms what's going on inside of you. And so, as with most things in Christianity, listening starts from the interior. It starts with loving our neighbor, starts with loving our family. And so, as you were pointing out, if we love our neighbor, we will lean into what they have to say. Effective listeners are proactive listeners. I like this one. What have I told you? Being a good listener means not only listening, but wanting to listen in the first place. And it's wanting to listen even when we don't want to listen. And you're probably all thinking right now of some people that you don't want to listen to, but you want to listen to them because you care about them. Either that, or you just want to shoot them and get off to something else. It's okay. It's a perfectly normal human reaction. Just don't act on it. All right. Just have deniable plausibility. All right. Or plausible deniability. So listening is so basic that we take it for granted. And most of us probably think we're better listeners than we actually are. And because it really is an engagement, and it's hard sometimes to engage. And most conversations are actually, and not in a hostile way, but just sort of jockeying for position. Who gets to talk? Who doesn't get to talk? Who gets to say what they want to? And as Michael Nichols says, think that you're not sometimes competing with each other. Try telling someone about a problem you're having and see how long it takes before they interrupt to describe a similar.
I'm just thinking about slowly
of their own and offer advice that may benefit them more than it does you. So we want to stay out of that sort of thing. And this is a lengthy quote, really important one. It's from Stephen King's The Body. It was made into a movie later called Stand By Me. And it says, the most important things are the hardest to say. They are the things you get ashamed of because words diminish them. Words shrink things that seemed limitless when they were in your head to no more than living size when they are brought out. But it's more than that, isn't it? The most important things lie too close to wherever your secret heart is buried, like landmarks to a treasure your enemies would love to steal away. And you may make revelations that cost you dearly, only to have people look at you in a funny way, not understanding what you've said at all, or why you thought it was so important that you almost cried when you were saying it. That's the worst, I think, when a secret stays locked within, not for want of a teller, but for want of an understanding ear.
Wow.
Isn't that remarkable? So,
That's the Stephen.
no, that's from The Body. And what you, yeah, that's they, most people, he writes horror stuff. This was a very autobiographical story, by the way. It's sort of his tender side finally ripped out, and said, enough horror, and he wrote things like this. So if we want someone or anyone actually to speak to us honestly, we have to make it safe enough for them to speak. Now, that's both the beauty and the risk of family if you're connected, or close friendship. The beauty is that you feel comfortable enough to say virtually anything. My very best friend died a couple of years ago. We would just say anything in each other's presence. There were no secrets. And that was the beauty of closeness. The risk of closeness is that because we're so free, we sometimes say things when we shouldn't. We forget that the other person's still a human being. And we also sometimes forget the person talking to us is a human being and not just our friend with whom we're laid back or excited all the time. Now, another quick disclaimer. Even though we're talking very intensely about listening, not every conversation is a life and death encounter. Okay, some conversations are just chats. They're just getting along with each other. They're just making jokes. They're whatever. Not every conversation demands a laser-like focus. But every encounter is an encounter with an important human being. They're important because they are a human being. So every encounter is still important. And so it calls for any conversation calls for at least the basics of the intense conversation. So for good listening, I believe at least there are 3 primary tasks. Showing up and being present. Effective listeners sort of develop the habit of making time to talk with their friends, with their family, with whomever. That's called friendship, is another way of putting that. They also create a sense of safety. If you know you're not going to be judged, if you know what you say is not going to be spread out to somebody else, it's easier to talk. Good friends, close families know this stuff, but it can be more difficult than we think. Because showing up means bracketing our needs for the moment and standing in there with that, leaning in, as you said, being present. It means being patient. And in our culture, patience is not a virtue. Patience is somebody we admire in other people. It means giving up our agenda. Second thing is actually listening. So you show up, you be present, and you don't just be there, but you actually listen. We might be silent, we might be still, as we said earlier, we're not passive. It's working at hearing and understanding the other person. Then the third thing is you respond when it's appropriate and as it's appropriate, based on what you've heard from your listening. Questions, and then more questions perhaps, or it could be comfort or advice. You know, we're always warned, if you're a good listener, you don't give advice. But I'll tell you what, if I say, I can't get my computer to work and you know how to do it, please tell me what to do. I want the damn advice, okay? I don't want, good listening would be giving me advice. It wouldn't be, oh, well, how are you feeling about that broken computer?
Drive him nuts.
So being truly empathic would be just giving me the advice, not asking me about my life history that led me to be distraught about it. Okay, I mean, that's what we pay psychoanalysts for.
It might also be appropriate to tell the person back about your own computer problem.
Right. Oh, yeah, you know, that happened to me just the other day. Okay, we're gonna go over mistakes we all make. Now cut it out, okay? Stop doing that. But as we go through, pick the ones out that make you say ouch when you read that. And like I said, I hate going through these, but one of them is knowing what to expect him or her to say, knowing what this person is actually like. And I don't know if is that too blurry to read?
It's a little blurry.
Okay. And again, this is one of these typical sexist memes because we're a lot more sensitive, okay, than we're given credit for. He's thinking women are so hard to read. She's saying, well, actually, we just want, they're such complex creatures. She goes, if you just listen, and then he goes, so mysterious. So knowing what the other person is like when actually people change all the time. That's both the beauty and the so since we actually don't know what someone is completely like, we can always ask, what's going on now? How you doing with it? What do you need from me? So it's okay to ask questions, especially because we don't always know. Another thing that we do is mind reading. You can read that. Don't think you know someone else's story. Ask them to tell you their story. Then down at the bottom it says, then there's only one story, rather than the several that are going on. Having an understanding doesn't mean presuming to know a person's thoughts and feelings. It means being open to listening and discovering. If you're speaking into a person's sentences, as you said, and they respond with no, I, then get back to listening. And if it happens a lot during the conversation, really cut it out. If you hear lots of no, I, like you must be feeling no, I, or it must be no, I. So remember, you are here to be with a person. They're enough like you to be able to communicate with us, but they're still completely unique.
Got a question.
Yeah.
Because as the conversation extends, doesn't the person want any feedback along the way as this conversation extends?
Yes. Good. He's saying as the conversation goes on, doesn't a person want feedback? Absolutely, that's great. Absolutely, because I said a little bit earlier, silence is just it's what the feedback is and how you give it. Like my best friend, you know, about 60 years, I could just say, Mac, what the hell are you thinking? But we were best friends for 60 years. That's a little different. But we could be best friends and it still might not be good to say that. So feedback is helpful, but I think it's helpful if you ask, do you want feedback? And again, it's contextual, depends on the person you're with. I have some thoughts on that. May I share them? Which is different than just saying you ought to, or something along those lines. Is that what you're thinking? Yeah, because you're engaged, because if you're not engaged, then
Not too soon.
yeah, you might as well be a chair or something. So yeah, feedback is important. Yeah.
Well, and so clearly, if the person is repeatedly going, no, clearly you're just like not accurate.
Right, you're off the mark and
Yes, you're off the mark.
you
that-
need to step back. Mm-hmm.
Your little gems are not gems.
Not yet. Well, they might be for you, right? This person is just too dumb to understand that I'm giving them gems, right? So mind reading is somewhat like second guessing. And we start this, no, this is when we all do. We rehearse our line. The person is telling us something important to them, and we're thinking about what we're going to say next.
Hmm.
So this guy is doing two things at once. He's anticipating, he's second guessing what will come next, because in an interview, they always say, and what are your weaknesses? He also, therefore, is not listening to the question. He's been rehearsing what he's going to say, and doing that can kind of be embarrassing at times. Not only is it not helpful to the person, but it's really kind of embarrassing when a person shifts from something that's been happening that they don't like to the fact that their favorite grandchild is coming to visit. But you've been thinking about the last thing about how can I say this? You go, oh, that must be awful. And they're thinking, I just told you that my favorite grandchild is coming to visit. And then things start to get weird, and then you just like run out of the room screaming. But so rehearsing your next line, thinking about what you're going to say, and not hearing what they have. And comparing. That's always a good one. If you think that's bad, you should hear what happened to Eleanor. Now, this immediately then minimizes what the person has just been telling you. And it's also kind of an attempt to fix them. Because in the sense that we genuinely don't like it when our friends suffer. At least I hope we don't like it when our friends, I mean, there might be one or two that you kind of, but that's different. That's just like, that's the rocky road of life, right? And they're feeling that about you sometimes too. So, and if you're really listening, you'll discover it. But in any case, and that's part of negotiating life together. But part of statements like this and other ones is an attempt to make things better for them, to get them away from the feelings that they're having. It's also an attempt for us to get away from the feelings that we're having.
Yeah.
You genuinely don't want them to suffer, and you don't want to suffer along with them. And I don't mean that in a hostile way. It's just that now you're being drawn into their pain, and which also tends to draw us into our pain and our own sense of helplessness sometimes. That's part of what makes listening difficult. Because listening is surrendering to some degree. Now, it doesn't mean we don't have feedback. That was a good point. But it does mean that sometimes we just need to be with the person where they are and let them be in their feelings and neither try to make the feelings go away nor take their feelings from them. You know, like, well, Eleanor, it was much worse for Eleanor, but we also can do that with joy. I can be excited about something. You can be excited with me, but if you get more excited than I am, now it's your joy that's going on. And now we're celebrating how happy you are instead of just kind of being with me and thinking, oh, that's great. You're glad you're doing that. So rather than compare to other people and indirectly fix, sometimes you just both have to be there. And again, it's not all bad stuff. It's also joy. It's wherever the person is, you kind of ride along there with them. Another thing we tend to do is over identify. This is something that you brought up earlier. It's always finding references from your own background and comparing them to what the speaker is saying. Usually it's an unspoken, oh, I can top that.
Maybe it's just related.
Well, and again, it depends on how you're relating.
Relating your experience and you have a relatable experience. You're relating to that experience.
Yes, it's one thing to say something along the lines of I've been there and allow them to ask you what it was like for you. You know, it's a different thing to say something along the lines of oh yes, my parents were in an accident too, and it was one of the worst experiences of my life. You know, I and then usually it's followed by, but the way I got around that was So so yeah, I think it's and again, you're making a good point. That that similar experiences can help make a connection. And as long as they're making a connection, it can be really helpful. And especially if the other person still has control of the conversation.
Preserve the show empathy.
Right. So it depends on whether you're making it about me or whether you're just letting them know
Hijacking.
that you've been hijacking it, or whether you know you're letting them know that you've been in that ballpark. And that's usually the best place to stop. So it's so that it's not a comparison like we just talked about the top part. But yeah, the connection is really important.
Very.
Oh, yes. Mhm.
Really don't, and really not walking out. So I think I have to be careful. When you walk out, trying to empathize.
Right, right. I mean, if we want to say something along those lines, I think the closest we can say is, I can only imagine how you feel, but actually, how do you feel?
Yeah.
And so they know you're trying to feel your way into where they are, but you're not thinking that you know what's happening with them.
And you're wanting to connect.
And you're wanting to connect. So yeah, so those connections followed by a question are helpful. Yeah.
Referring to that question, I think one of the hardest things that I don't know how to deal with is like when somebody's like a spouse or something. I don't know. And yeah, how do you be a good listener in a situation when you can't identify them?
Okay, the question was, how do you be a good listener in a situation where you really just like can't identify, like, you know, I've not lost a spouse, but you're with someone who has lost a spouse. So I think you probably can identify a little bit because you've had grief in your life. So you know the experience of grief. It's not the specific grief that they are having, but you know that that maybe, you know, that in general, grief can sometimes feel like fear. Somebody said grief is love that no longer has a place to go. So you know grief. You just don't know that category of grief or the other person's specific grief. So I think the way that you be a good listener is you be quiet, you be present, because we've all been with people that we've been present with, even though we've just sat in silence for 15 minutes, but they were there. If it seems appropriate, you just ask how they're doing. You want to, oh, yeah, you just ask how are you doing?
Is that a good question for somebody who's leaving?
I think that's a good question for almost anybody all the time, if you're ready to hear the answer. If you're not ready to hear the answer, you don't ask the question.
It's a friend of mine that during her time of grief, that was the last thing she wanted to do, was somebody asking her.
Well, I think again, it depends. That's a good, yeah. She just pointed out that a friend of hers had an experience of grief, and how are you doing was the last thing she wanted to hear from people. You have to have the right to ask particular questions. If, for example, it is a dear friend of mine who is grieving, then in a way, and I mean, you would know them well enough to know if this would be a good thing, but in a way, I have earned the right to ask the question. If I don't know them, then I can't just be with somebody I just met and, you know, and hear that, oh, you've lost your spouse, how you doing? So it's tone of voice, it's the prior connection, it's all that sort of thing. So does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe in a situation like that where you're not sure, you could say something like, I can only imagine how you feel. When and if you're ready to talk about it, I'd love to listen.
That's good. If and when you're ready to talk, I'm willing to listen. Yeah.
Possibly in a time of grief, but just about in any situation. When you're entering into someone else's space, you need permission to enter that space. So in that conversation, there needs to be a ritual of some kind that involves obtaining or not obtaining permission to enter that space.
Okay, what he said was that in any conversation, you're entering somebody else's space and you need permission to enter that space. And there might be a ritual that helps obtain or not obtain that. And by ritual, I'm taking it you mean that there's always it's like entering a room. You know, some rooms, depending on the circumstances, you can just barge into and go, hey, I'm here, like with my buddy Mac. Unless there are circumstances, even with him. Other times you have to say, may I come in? Or is this a convenient moment? Or
Sometimes you just stand at the door
and wait. Mhm. but you have to let them know you're there.
Yeah, I mean, yeah,
And you pay attention. We're not,
it's verbal and nonverbal.
right, we're not clods if you're asking some questions and they keep turning away or looking away or talking about something else, then you just go back to doing whatever it is you're doing with them.
You can bring it better.
Or you just look at your iPhone because that's what everybody does. So just very quickly, behaviors to avoid. These are not only signs to them, these are signs to you that you're not paying attention. Now, one of them is this. Another is flipping your pencil, or what I used to do is I would take because I found it in my sort of mildly Asperger's way, I would take my ring and I would just spin it, interrupting, which is something you brought up, yawning, which I've noticed a few of you have done. And I just want you to know that you're being videoed.
Those old binders, yeah.
Repeated glancing at your watch, looking out the door or when you're sitting, you're looking out the door or the window, your cell phone, seeing other people. The other day, in fact, I was having dinner with a really dear friend. And I mean, you can't help but notice that there's a world behind the person, depending on the circumstances. And we were having dinner and we were talking, and a woman walked in that had the most amazing tattoos. I mean, they were just remarkable. And fortunately, I had been getting ready to give this talk. So I said, don't stare at the tattoo. At which point she said to me, why are you saying don't stare at the tattoos? I said, oh, I thought that was in my head. No, but under a different, so if we were talking about LeBron James' foot injury, I would have said something like, wow, when you get the chance, look over your left shoulder and look at those tattoos. But it was not called for at the moment. So I just said to myself, don't bring up the tattoos and just keep looking and listening with your friend. So but if I didn't do that, that would kind of be a sign to her that I wasn't interested. Again, if you're talking about LeBron James' foot injury, unless they really love LeBron James or something, stuff like that's fine. But otherwise, you just try to stay focused. And of course, the fixing things. I know what to do. Here's what you can do. This is what my Aunt Ella did in a situation like this. Now, if somebody asks for advice, it's fine to give it. But if they're not asking for advice, don't jump in and spare your own anxiety or try to get them out of theirs. Because if you start fixing things, sometimes people can hear it as, would you just stop whining and get on with it? Bless you, by the way. Or this is too upsetting to me. Let's just take care of this. But this is tough for most of us. In fact, much of the things we've been talking about are tough for us to do. So I mean, we need to be gentle with ourselves, because listening, being in a relationship, being alive with another human being is always a process. And we're always in process. We want the trajectory to be good, but no human trajectory goes like this. It goes like this. But if the general trajectory is good, then you're doing pretty darn well. So it's tough not to be doing these things. It's tough not to be a fixer in a very activist kind of a culture that we live in. So maybe another way to think about it after I've been telling you all these things to stop doing, is to worry a little bit less about stopping doing the hard things and focus more on doing the right things. You know, catching yourself doing the wrong thing, great. But try to focus more. The more it's like the old story about the ship guy who drove barges down the Mississippi, and the apprentice said, well, how do you remember where all the sandbars are? And so that you don't run into them. And the captain said, I don't worry about where the sandbars are because I've learned to stay where the water is deep. So it's not just avoiding interrupting or looking away a lot or whatever. It's good to know that we do these things so that we cannot do them, but it's better to know where the deep water is. It's better to know and to remember to focus, to be present, to show up. Because the more you're doing the right thing, the less you're going to be doing the unhelpful things. And when we do something that's unhelpful, it's really okay to say, as I catch myself doing sometimes, I interrupted you. I am sorry. Please keep going. And so it's okay to acknowledge something. You know, if your mind wanders and the person discovers your mind has wandered, you just say, I'm really sorry, my mind wandered for a moment. I really am interested in what you're saying. Let's get back to it. So it's okay to confess your sin. But if the other person hasn't noticed it, nah, for two reasons, actually. One is because you got away with something and that feels great. But the second is that it could actually be disruptive to them. They don't need to know that you just made a mistake as long as they're still in a place where you're being helpful to them. Just get back to what you're doing. And again, we're not idiots. We notice, as you were saying, we notice when they're giving us feedback. If they're talking and all of a sudden clam up, or they all of a sudden change the subject, that can either be because it's too troubling for them, or their mind wandered, or whatever, or it can be because they're picking up from us that oh, sorry. Or that. So really be gentle with yourself. We're almost to an end here. It's a new habit of the heart. We're not as good at listening. Now, if you don't want to be a better listener, then don't worry about it. If you don't want to be one, that's your choice. But I think you wandered into the wrong class, for one thing. But if you want to be a better listener, it's developing a habit of the heart. It's not just, and it's important, but it's not just remembering to focus on the person, to really be present, even if you're being silent. These are all things that are really helpful. But one of the best starting places is in our own interior. It's important for me talking to you right now to remember that every single one of you is a precious human being. Some of you are suffering right now. Some of you are delighted right now. Some of you are thinking about your golf game. See, I can read minds. And I'm telling you, slow down your backswing. But every one of you is a precious human being. And if I can remember that even while I'm up here talking, and if I can remember that when I'm with a friend, or I can remember that with somebody I just met, that helps. That makes me want to remember and do some of the stuff I've learned. And it helps it come easier. Remembering that you're a person I'm talking with, makes it easier for me to be with you and to try to not just do the wrong thing, but to try to do the right thing. Because doing the right thing helps prevent doing the wrong thing. So to quote Nichols again, most failures of understanding are not due to self-absorption or bad faith. Bless you. Bless you. That's another thing, sneezing. Sneezing while someone is talking. But which is good, because the last time he was here, he actually threw something at me. So, a golf ball, if I remember. And he's the one I'm telling to slow down in backswing. So there. Actually, Jack Nicklaus, the great golfer, said before every shot, he says 3 things. He says slow, slow, slow. Which actually, I was kind of making a little joke there, but now that I think of it, is not a bad thing when we encounter another human being, is it? To slow down, to divest ourselves, to create space for them and for us. So, wow. Thanks for sneezing. It's divine providence. And he doesn't even have a cold. So it must have been God making him sneeze. Anyway, most failures of understanding are not due to self-absorption or bad faith, but to our own need to say something. We tend to react to what is said rather than concentrating on what the other person is trying to express. Interestingly enough, Alan Greenspan, knows that? Did I get him? No. Alan Greenspan, remember he was the director of the Fed? Yeah, well, yeah, that's okay. This is great. Alan Greenspan. I know you think you understand what you thought I said, but I'm not sure you realize that what you heard is not what I meant. And that's the boat we're all in. It's not bad faith. It's not that we're all totally egocentric. It's just that that's how conversations go. Emotional reactions make us respond without thinking and without understanding. We get clouded in our heads. We all have characteristic ways of reacting. Some of us are interrupters. You know, some of us are sneezers. Some of us get squirmy. Some of us look away. Some of us change the subject. We all have characteristic ways of respect, and that is also a sign to us that something's going on. We can look at it later if we want to, but something's going on with us. I need to just regather myself, recenter, and be present with the other person. To finish up, it's a quote from a colleague of mine who said, being heard, and by being heard, he means being listened to the way we're using the phrase, is so close to being loved that for the average person, they are almost indistinguishable. Just think about when you know, like earlier, we were thinking about people we're with who make us feel listened to. And it does feel like love, doesn't it? There's something that happens that's healing, that's enriching, that's healing. Right. So just being listened to is almost indistinguishable from being loved. So just remember that. Now, before we finish up, any last minute questions, concerns, anxieties, rebuttals? I see that hand.
I was wondering if you could just speak to this urge or feeling like there's a demand on me as a listener to give a moral endorsement or appraisal of the behavior that's being described.
Oh,
Especially as a Christian, if somebody comes to me and says something like, do I need to comment on this? Like, do I need to give them a thumbs up or thumbs down? Can you speak to that a little bit? I don't know if anyone can relate to that.
yeah, no, being empathic and being receiving is not necessarily being agreeing. And I think it depends on the context or the circumstances about whether we give a thumbs up or a thumbs down. If somebody says, tell me what you think about that, then again, you don't attack them, but you tell them what you think. You think, well, you know, from where I'm coming from, and again, it depends on how well you know the person. With Mac, I would go, what the hell are you thinking? But with somebody else, I'll wait till they ask. Because unless we are in a relationship where we give each other that kind of feedback, it's generally not helpful. Now, if somebody's doing something really terrific, it's great to be encouraging. If somebody's doing something dangerous, again, depending on how well you know them, it's okay to cautiously be cautious. To try to give them a little bit, let them know you're concerned that this is potentially bad or unhelpful or dangerous. But making moral judgments I think is only called for when they're asked for, unless you're in a position that you're supposed to be doing that with someone. Like I would hope that if somebody here was in flagrant sin, that one of your pastors would sit and talk with you. Whereas only a good friend would have the right to do something like that. And Christians, especially in our culture, I think, generally conservative Christians, but forget that the Apostle Paul in his letters, where he's doing correcting and instructing and stuff, he's writing to other Christians. I don't have the right to tell a non-Christian that they're supposed to live this particular kind of way. Whereas in a sense, I have the right to talk to another Christian about particular ways to live. So Paul was writing to the Christian community. He wasn't writing to the whole world. So I don't have the right to tell an atheist that he or she needs to pray more. But I do have, under certain circumstances, the right to suggest to somebody that, oh, you might want to spend more time in prayer. And here are a couple different ways to do it. Lectio Divina, da, 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 da. Is that the question you were asking?
Yeah, and what I'm hearing is it's very likely that the person might not ask for my opinion at all.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Wait, I see that hand. Yeah.
Yeah, Gary, first of all, I want to thank you so much for modeling being this exquisite mistress. The way you talk with everybody. And I just want to say something, underline something you alluded to or talked about several times today, and that is, I think listening has too civil a rap. Because when we listen, like I know when I have trouble listening, is when whatever is being said to me goes into my material that I don't even want to have. And triggers me. And then I do something interruptive. So it's like I have to go process and try to handle my anxiety for my own material that gets stirred up, as well as try to figure out where the other person is and what they're doing. That's complex. That's really difficult.
Right. Listening is hard to do. And actually it kind of bookends a little bit with what you were saying about when a person is when a person processes before they respond. The silence is not a dead silence. It's ooh, I'm thinking about this. And then the added dynamic is not only I'm thinking about what's going on with you, but I'm being aware of what's evoked in me, so that I can still be there with you. So did you want to say something?
I was resonating on a number of things that you said, and I was comparing and contrasting also in my head with what it's like to listen and to speak in other cultures and other languages. I think most people have noticed Greco-Roman families are very, whether they're from Greece or from any Latin-speaking country, much louder, and everybody's talking at the same time, and you wonder how is it possible that they can listen to each other when they're all talking at the same time. And it comes into the redundancy of the language itself. The language permits it. English is more concise. German is even more concise. And the more concise and the crisper a language is, the more difficult it is to talk and listen at the same time. But when you're talking to somebody who sometimes appears to not be listening, it helps to bring into that thought process what culture they're coming from. Because it might just be that they come from a culture where that form of listening is appropriate,
Right.
right?
Cross-culturally, what he was talking about was that sometimes, in different, in fact, we were just talking to somebody the other night that said, Spain makes me tired.
Yeah.
And it's because she was saying, because everybody's talking all at once. So ask me a question, I'll say, and all of a sudden everybody's still talking again. So it's just sometimes people communicate differently in different cultures, and it's not necessarily bad or good. It's like distances. You know, we tend to talk like this, other cultures, the people are, and so you'll talk to somebody from wherever, and you'll be backing up the whole time, and they'll be coming the whole time. So we need to get you to church. So God bless you and keep you. God's face shine upon you, be gracious unto you. God's countenance be lifted up upon you and give you peace. And thanks for listening.